So welcome back guys to a Gaia deck profile. This has been in the works for a couple of months, probably 2 months. Since Gaia released, I was playtesting this deck. I haven't been playtesting it as of recently, but I basically settled on a almost finalized build. In my personal opinion, this is a pretty good framework for how the deck should go. This deck is probably not the most consistent out of all the other deck builds that you've seen top or just other people's deck builds, but this is what works for me, so that should be taken into account when looking at this deck list. Some of the choices are going to be unorthodox, some of the ratios are going to be unorthodox, and my reasoning for these deck choices are going to be a little unorthodox as well. But without further ado, let's get into it. Of course, first we have the starter. Some people like minimum Carno. I like Dragon Egg personally, but it's all personal preference. Yeah, just a starter. Here is where my ratio differs from other people. So what I do is I run 6 crit, no sentinel crit here, and 6 draw. For the sentinel draw, and 2 the normal draw, and then 4 heals. This is what I ran in Megarex, this is what I ran in Anger Blader, and this is what I'm going to be running for Gaia. I just find this the most consistent. I like the draw power. The 5Ks off of the vanilla draw trigger are fine. I mean, if you get an early game, you can just drop it for a 1-pass. It's basically essentially like how you use a quick shield. You can also use it to sack off, so if you don't have anything in hand to retire for stuff like Megarex or Terror, you can just call a vanilla draw trigger, sack it off, and get a free card, versus calling down a 15k shield and then sacking that, getting a card, which is a little more wasteful. Now on to the grade 1. So what I play is 3 Sonic Noa. Sonic Noa I think is still good in this deck. Its mandatory gauge probably isn't too good, but I mean, on boost is a gauge. That's pretty good. On hit, retire, which is still pretty good. It's an extra card that retires. I do wish the clan had an on attack retire grade 1. Just like Megarex or Terrortherizino, but that's wishful thinking for the future. So we have 3 Sonic Noa. Of course, with Sonic Noa, you can't not have Laceraterex. Laceraterex, I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory. Gauges itself, and so it gets that extra plus 10k from Gaia. You can also get that gauge back to hand. It's just a really good filter card, a really good retire card, and it gains you quite a bit of hand advantage. Next, we have 4 Bluesprint. This is our multi-attack extender Bluesprint. Basically, on attack, gauge anything you want on Vanguard or Rearguard Circle. And then the second skill is when retired, due to your card effect during your turn, you can choose to call up to one of its gauges, and you can give the called unit 1 gauge from the top of your deck. This extends attacks, although it is a hard once per turn, so you can't use its skill again with another card the same card name, so you can't use 2 Bluesprints in a turn. Regiodon, which will be coming up, is basically the same thing. And after that, I have 4 Prism Bird. Prism Bird is just there to fetch out Gaia. That's really it. You don't really want to ride Terror, though riding Terror is fine. You're not necessarily bricking if you ride Terror, although if you stay on Terror for more than 2 turns, you're kind of dead. And on to our grade 2s. Grade 2 time. So what I have here, this is a controversial part, by the way. So I have 3 Regiodon. Regiodon is the same thing as Bluesprint. You would think I'd max this out at 4, but no. I wanted more grade 2 space. I wanted to fit in a special little card that some people think is not necessary in the deck, but I think is a pretty good addition to the deck considering what other options we have. The next grade 2 is going to be Dilophopyro. 3 Dilophopyro, which is our new triple rare. Basically, on place from hand, Iron Blast 1, call or draw a card from your hand, then call a card from your hand. You can choose to give that unit 1 gauge. And then the second skill is when it's called from your gauge, it gets plus 10k. So this is a free 19k beater if you call from gauge. Then with Reggiodon and Bluesprint secondary skill, gives it a gauge. It's going to be 29k. If it's on Accel circle, Accel 2 circle, it's going to be 34. Accel 1 is going to be 39. The Dilophopyro is a pretty big beat stick if you call it off of Reggiodon or Bluesprint. It makes it pretty good. And its on ride and on call skill is also decently good. Just because it gauges a card and you also get to refund the card you called. Next, we have, of course, Megarex. 3 Megarex. The reason I'm going with 3 is because there is Terrortherizino in the deck already, so I don't really need to, have too many retire units. If I have too many retire units, then the deck gets a little clunky. Gaia himself is a retire unit, so I don't want to have too many retire units and not enough beat stick units, since for Megarex to become a beat stick, you kind of need to use a counterblast, which it's kind of scarce in this deck. I will be talking about Polcanspine after this. There are reasons for Polcanspine not being in this specific deck build, but there are reasons why Polcanspine should be in this deck build. And then finally, I run 3 Sweeper. This is a controversial part, by the way. This is the very controversial part. People are saying that, oh, Sweeper cannot be run. He needs 3 gauge. It's so clunky in a Gaia build. Sweeper is just really bad. Hefty Styroco, the True Ancient Dragon can't be retired unit, is better than Sweeper. Here is my reasoning for Sweeper. Sweeper gives itself a gauge, which means that automatically it becomes a 24k beater. If you call it off of Regiodon or Bluesprint, automatic 29k because it gauges itself again. It's on Accel circle, Accel 2 circle, 34. Accel 1 circle, 39. This is basically the same thing as Dilophopyro if called off a gauge. The Sweeper is just extra copies of that, except it can stay on board. You can reach 3 gauge quite easily if your opponent isn't hard targeting it, but that's a plus side. If your opponent's hard targeting your rearguard Sweeper, they're not going to your face, which means you're going to be taking less damage, you're going to be distracted by your Sweeper, and you can set up for future multi-attack turns because Sweeper is not your key to victory. Bluesprint and Regiodon are your key to victory. Sweeper's there as a distraction card, as a beat stick card, as an all-around good card, and I don't think this card should be cut out of the deck. However, I do think it should not be run as a 4-of, and it should not be run as a 1-of. It should be run as a 2 or 3-of. You can honestly just put Sweeper down to 2 and then add an extra slot to anything else you want. That's really it for my grade 2 lineup. As for my grade 3 lineup, it's pretty straightforward. 4 Gaia, 3 Terrortherizino as a retire unit. Same thing as Megarex, except we can snipe stuff. There's not really much explanation to this. Savage Mercenary is very luck reliant. I don't really like Savage Mercenary since it screws up the consistency super hard. I don't really know what other grade 3s you put in here. I guess like Gigarex. Gigarex just doesn't do anything when you ride it, just gauges, nothing else. You don't get anything off. Anger Blader doesn't fit in here because of the sole reason that your cards need 3 gauge and you cannot get 3 gauge that fast. And also the only cards that are really good at 3 gauge are Megarex and Sweeper in this deck. So it's kind of useless. Dark Rex, I guess, you're not gonna really use it. There's not a lot of gauge involved. So Dark Rex is just kind of there. And that's about it for the deck profile. I almost forgot to talk about Polcanspine. Polcanspine is a card that lets you countercharge, soul charge, and move gauge around. It just does everything really for a resource card. It is a 7k base though, so it isn't put into too many decks at too many copies. What I would recommend for a Gaia deck is to put Polcanspine as a 2-of, and that's really the max I would go. Maybe a 3-of if you're experiencing a lot of damage denial or you're just using resources way too often. Other than that, that's really the most I'd put it at. I've said this a couple of times in the Discord server, but Polcanspine usage goes up the better your opponent is. Since the better your opponent is, the more opportunities that they see for damage denial and to shut you down while also crippling your hand and knowing when to attack your rear guards so that they can rip the cards out of your hand so that they cripple you harder and they can push harder later into the game. And so these smarter players know how to counter the deck and they know how to just go around everything the deck does, and one thing to help out with that is Polcanspine. Polcanspine reduces the damage denial part. If you're soul blasting a lot, it can also help with soul. If you're like, we're assuming you're spamming Laceraterex or something like that. If you need gauge to be moved around, and you don't have that many gauge generators, then Polcanspine is certainly good for you, as it can be a 22k attacker in Accel 2, and then after that retiring it, giving a gauge to something else, which then gives another 10k buff, which I think is kind of good. So it can be used offensively as well as for resource management. It doesn't really do anything defensively. It's just a grade 1 10k shield, 7k power. Its power line is not too great, but it is good enough. And as I said, usage of Polcanspine goes up the better your opponent is, whether they be damage denying you or they're just straight up attacking your rear guards, the ones that generate gauge for you. And yeah, as for combos, right? These will mostly just be some friendly combos that I'll be showcasing. Or not friendly, sorry. Simple combos. Not gonna be too hard. I'll just be going through things. So, like with normal, let's say Sonic Noa is your Vanguard. You know, the normal, you call it Laceraterex, give it a gauge, attack, hits, retire, draw, and gets the gauge back. That's a normal combo. You can also do the same thing with Bluesprint if you have Noa and Vanguard if you really want to. Your ideal ride target would be Prism Bird if you're going first. If you're going second, Sonic Noa would be your ideal ride target. A fun thing to do on grade 2 is when you ride Dilophopyro, and let's say you're going against a Luard deck, right? You can actually use this counterblast skill to call out a Terrortherizino on rear, because this is a superior call, which means you can call it out. And then you just call something that can gauge itself, like Bluesprint or Laceraterex or Regiodon, like one of these three cards. If you call one of these, then you can snipe your opponent. Or snipe your opponents in the main. Pretty good. Calling out Terror on grade 2. Or you could just call it out, give it a gauge, and just move it to the back row. That's a thing also. just so that it has the gauge for next turn, so it gets the buff. It's usually with Terrortherizino columns, they're pretty weak. Other than that, I mean, grade 2 turns are essentially the same. Ideally, you want to ride Megarex, or that's your second ideal ride. You want to ride Dilophopyro most of all. Second ideal ride is Megarex. Hopefully you have something to sack. And then of course your ideal grade 3 ride is Gaia Emperor. Now here's the thing, right? People have been debating between Accel 1 and Accel 2. Accel 1 for the push power, Accel 2 for the draw. Now, in my humble opinion, Accel 1 is there when you know you can push hard. If you know you can put your opponent in a very crippled game state, then I would go Accel 1. Or if you just have the high edge because of early game. Otherwise, if you're pretty equal or you don't have any pieces or so on and so forth, you just need cards, go Accel 2. I want to try Accel 1 for a little bit. Some people have been justifying Accel 1 because this deck draws so much, which I do not think it does enough. Not enough against meta decks such as Luard or the upcoming Gurguit or Full Bronto. Against those decks, this deck does not draw too much to regain its resources back. I think Accel 2 would help out a little more there, though I will experiment with Accel 1 since I haven't used Accel 1 too much yet. And that's about it for this deck profile. I hope you guys enjoyed. There are videos that I'm planning for the future. I don't know how fast I can get them out due to schoolwork and all that. I might transition over to just monthly uploads as I've done with this one. And yeah, thanks for watching. Leave a like if you like it, dislike if you don't. Any comments on what I should do in the future. Subscribe if you want to see more Tachi content. Ring the bell if you want to stay up to date. And I will see you guys later.